Okay, welcome everyone. So our first order of business is that my very, very long time Mispalo, he was there already in the shul when I came to the shul over 43 years ago. Blazer Kern is having heart surgery tomorrow. We want to dedicate the shir to his refuah shalema. Very big Talmud Chacham, Eliezer Tzvi ben Chana. He should have a successful surgery and a refuah shalema b'seich sharchei Yisrael. His son Dovi is one of my very dear Talmidim, and I believe he does listen to these shiurim as well. So Dovi, we're learning for your father, and we wish that everything should go easy for him. We are sponsored by Shalom Fogel, Ilanishmas Yaakov Zeb ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka Bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam Bas Gad, Yosef ben Zion ben Yaakov Zev, by Baruch Ian, Ilanishmas Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther Bas Gittel, Avram ben Shmuel HaKohen, by Yaakov Yamansky, a Karsa Tov to the Rav and the Zoom family, and Nachas from children and grandchildren, A.B. Spry, Nachas from children and grandchildren, Ed Salah from London, and Joshua Rosenberg, a virtual Talmud. We welcome in Mo Kushner and Saba, Irving Fishbaum, El Zachter, Berish Gesserman, Marshall Castle, Dr. Guy, Baruch Ian, Mark Frankel, Shalom Fogel, Ruvain Pollack, Yisrael Fisher, Shimon Klein, Dr. Black, Eddie Chazan, Shelley Zeitlin, Ahmed Chapler, who is sponsoring the Chumash here tonight, Aaron Swade, Rabbi Kranz, Moshe Lehman, Avram Rezepkowitz, Yitzi Muller, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Naftali Jablin, Yitzi Fuchs, Ilya Shutman, Abe Arbach, and David Helfgott on Koloshin. Here we have the pleasure of having Chaim Kramer, Rich Lenner, Ruvain, Michal Avram. We want to welcome in Reb Krause. It's wonderful to have you. And sorry keeping you waiting so long. This was not expected. Ruvain Shanit. And we are holding, very interesting Gemara we have over here, as we are holding by Omer Rab Ami, 4 lines from the bottom of Kufchav Vav Amud Beis. 4 lines from the bottom of Kufchav Vav Amud Beis. Omer Rab Ami, Tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zocher. A tumtum is a person who is born with his genitals covered, and therefore we don't know the sex, if it's a male or a female. If they did a surgery and they ripped him open and found that he was a male, Eina noitel pishnayim. Even though he was the firstborn, he doesn't get a double portion. Why? It's a gzeres hakasev. The Amakra, the pasuk says, "V'hoya haben abechor lasniya." If a man has 2 wives and one was hated and one was loved, his rachis einai, even if it's the firstborn of the hated wife, is the one that gets the double portion. But since the pasuk says v'hoya, we darshan ad sheyeh ben, he has to be a known boy mishas havaya, from the time he came in existence. And since we didn't know if he was a boy when he came into existence until the surgery, he's not entitled to a double portion. Now, because we're discussing the ramifications of being a tumtum, we're going to learn a lot of other things. This is the way Shas works. It sometimes goes into a tangent. So, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Af einay nidain keben sorer umora. We know that the wayward and rebellious child who steals and acts gluttonously and engages in debauchery, he is put to death if he does that right away at the beginning of his maturity, in the first 3 months after his bar mitzvah. But if he was a tumtum, even though they ripped him open and found out that he was a zocher, he's not put to death as a soira amira. The Amakra ki ish ben soira amira. Again, the key word is yeh. If there is to a man a wayward and rebellious child, ache ben mishas havaya, we had to know that he was a son from when he came into existence. Amemar Amar, as we turn to Daf Kuf Chav Zayin, Amemar Amar, Amemar says, Also, af einay memayet chelik b'chayra. If he is not the bechar, he doesn't diminish the firstborn's portion. Now that's a very interesting halacha. That means, let's say there's 3 children, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Right? Again, giving Marshall a break. I don't know why. Just Reuven, Shimon, and Levi just sounds better than Reuven, Shimon, and Marshall.
That's why you're going through the background. It makes sense.
So anyway, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven is Bechar. Shimon is a tumtum. He was torn open and he found that he was a boy. So he also is an heir. However, when computing the double portion of the Reuven, we take him out of the running. And therefore, if there was $900, we say that there's only Reuven and Levi. And if there's only Reuven and Levi, we divide the $900 into 3 portions. The first, Reuven's portion, the double portion, and Levi's portion. And we give Reuven a double portion of $300. Now, after that, there's left over $600, and that we divide into 3. 200 for Reuven's regular portion, 200 for Shimon the Tumtum, and 200 for Levi. So in that way, Reuven walks away with $500. Now, why is it that when computing the double portion, we don't put the Tumtum in the computation? Shenema, because it says v'yoldu lo banim, and the father had children, Achie ben b'shas leida. In order to be in the calculation of the double portion, he had to be there from the time of birth. Rav Shizbi Amar, Rav Shizbi says another application. He's also not circumcised on the 8th day. Now, of course he's circumcised on the 8th day in a regular situation. But if the 8th day is on Shabbos, and he was born at Tumtum and a surgical procedure was done, his Mila does not supersede the Shabbos. They'll have to wait till Sunday. Why? A woman who conceives and gives birth to a Zachar, on the 8th day, there's always a circumcision, even if it's Shabbos, but that's only Zachar Mishas Leida. That's only if he knew he was a male at the time of birth. Rav Shravya Amar, Rav Shravya says, well, that parsha of Isha Kisazriya also talks about Tumas Leida. Right? We know that if the mother has a Zachar, she's tamei for 7 days. If she has a Nekeva, she's tamei for 14 days. Rav Shravya says a big chiddush. Rav Shravya Amar af ein imoy tmeya leida. The mother is not contaminated with the tumah of birth. The Amakra, because the pasuk says Isha kizazriya v'yolda zachar v'tama shivas yamim, and she's tama 7 days, but it's only Achie Zachar Mishas Leida. It's only if he was male from the time of birth. Says the Gemara, are you telling me that if the child is born a tumtum, the mother isn't tummy at all? She doesn't have tumas dam? We learned Tamapeles tumtum vandrogenes. If a woman miscarries a tumtum, fetus, that its genitals were covered, or a hermaphrodite, it's a person that has both simony of a male and a female. The din is misafik teishev lezachar ulenekeva. We give the mother a chumrah of a zachar and a nekeva. Now the chumrah of a nekeva means that she's tamei for 14 days, and the chumrah of a zachar is that unlike a birth of a female where the mother has, after the Yemei Tumah, 66 clean days, we say that it might be a Zachar and only has Yemei Tara of 33 days. So we give it the Chumrah of a Nekeva that she's tamei 14 days in the beginning, and the chumrah of a zacher that she only has 33 days of tara. So you see from over here that a tumtum does have tumas later. So the Gemara says to Yufta the Rav Shravya to Yufta. That's a refutation of Rav Shravya. Indeed, it's a refutation of Rav Shravya. Says the Gemara, well, if it's a refutation of Rav Shravya, and that means that we don't darshan Isha ki sazriya b'yolda zachar, that it has to be a zachar from the time of birth, so then let's say Lema Tavi Tiyufta the Rav Shizbi. It should also be a refutation of Rav Shizbi, who says that on the 8th day it doesn't supersede the Shabbos because it says Isha ki sazriya b'yolda zachar ad shetei zachar b'shas later. But here you see we say that there is tumas later, so we don't say that drasha. And if we don't say that drasha, then we should do mila on a tumtum that was surgically open, even if the 8th day falls out on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, well, maybe not. Tana svuke misafkale. The Tana is not sure whether we say this drasha or lechumra, and we go lechumra. So therefore, in the case of Tumah, we go lechumra and say that maybe there is tumas later, and since maybe there is tumas later and it's a tumtum or androgynous, so we therefore have to keep the chumrah of 14 days of tumah like in a keva, and 33 days of tara like a zacher, and maybe over here by mila we go lechumra and say that maybe it has to be a zacher from the time of birth, and therefore its 8th day cannot supersede the Shabbos. Says the Gemara, but that's difficult. And here the Gemara asks a very clever question. The Gemara doesn't need my askama, but the Gemara says, Ihachi, if that's the case, then we should entertain yet one more doubt. And what would be the doubt that we entertain? We should say that maybe there isn't tumas later since it wasn't clearly a zachar at the time of birth, and therefore, if there's no tumah or tara, then we should apply also the laws of regular nidas. In other words, if there's no tumas laid at all, since it wasn't clear what it was at the time of birth, then she has the regular cycle of a nida. And therefore, ihachi teshev l'zachul and the kevel nida mebayile. It should also add nida, says Gemara Kasha. That's a very good kasha. Amar Rava, Tanya Kavase de Rab Ami. There is a brisa like Rab Ami that a tumtum that was surgically opened doesn't get a double portion, because it says clearly ben v'loy tumtum, a son and not a tumtum, and bechar v'loy safek, a firstborn and not a doubt. So the Gemara says, okay, bishleima ben v'loy tumtum, that's telling us kirabami, that since he wasn't clearly, it says by a double portion, it says that kiyiyah, what was the lashon of the hated wife? It says v'hoya ben abachar. So it has to be, if he wants to get a double portion, he has to be clearly the son when he came into existence. But what's this din b'char v'loy safek, a firstborn and not a doubt? So the Gemara says la fuke mai. What's that coming to exclude? La fuke mididarish Rava. It comes to exclude the exposition of Rava, the drasha of Rava. This is a very interesting case. A man has two wives. We'll call them Sarah and Dina. A man has two wives, and it was a time of persecution, and they both delivered in a cave. And this was the husband's first children, and they both had boys. But we don't know which one was born first. The Darish Rava, Shtei Noshim Sheyoldu Beizacharim B'machbei. The two wives, Sarah and Dinah, each had a boy in hiding. Now, later on, the husband, Reuven, had other children. Now, when Reuven dies, we don't know which one was his Rashis Ono, his first strength. We don't know if it was Sarah's child or Dinah's child. So, these two children, they could write power of attorney one to the other and say, look, if I'm the Bechar, if I'm not the Bechar, I allow you to collect. And the other one writes, if I'm not the Bechar, I allow you to collect. So then they could take one double portion and split it amongst them. Now this means, even though it's a suffix, so the teaching of Bechar v'lo suffix is coming to say not like Rava, because Rava says that even though it's a doubt and we don't know which one is the firstborn, one of them should get the firstborn rights. Amalei Rapapa l'Rava, so Rapapa says to Rava, you allow them, even though it's not known which one was the firstborn, to take an extra portion and share it? This question I asked all my Rebbeim, v'loy amru li davar. They didn't give me a definitive answer. However, but in truth, kach omru mishum Rab Yanai, they did say in the name of Rab Yanai, hokru, if in the cave they knew which one was born first, but then they got mixed up. They were, after all, little babies. It was dark, and they got mixed up. There was a time that it was known which one was the firstborn. So since there was a time that it was known, so then at the time of Leda, it was known which one was the firstborn. So in that case, they could write a power of attorney one to another. Loyokru, but if they didn't even know at the time of birth, they both women were in pain, and they don't know which one was born first, then ein kaisvin ashozelazeh, because then Itaka wasn't known, we didn't know which one was the firstborn at the time of birth. So Rava, one of the reasons why he was such a great Paisik, is Rava didn't mess around with pride. Rava took a broadcaster. Remember, in those days they didn't have microphones, so if they taught a large crowd, they got somebody who had a strong radiophonic voice. Sometimes they got more than one to broadcast in different parts of the giant room, and he would say in a loud voice. So Dorish, and he had them explain, and look at the humility over here. Dvarim shamarti lachem, that which I told you, toyes ein biyadi. I was in error. Bram kach omru mishum Rab Yanai. There's a distinction. Hokru lo b'seifnis arvu. If at the time of the birth they knew which one was the Bechar, so it was at the time of Leda, at the time of existence, there was a firstborn known. The two children could write power of attorney one to another, and they could take a firstborn portion and share it amongst themselves. Loyokru, but if it wasn't known, ein kaisvin ashozelazeh. Now, sholchulei b'nei akra da Agma l'Shmuel. The people of the fort of Agma sent to Shmuel the following question: Yalamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us our master. Hayu mechzokin b'zeh shehu b'char. A man has a bunch of children, and we assumed that Chaim was the firstborn, because people used to call him the firstborn. V'amar aviv al achar b'charu. And the father said no, even though this person had a chazaka, cheskas b'char, the father, who will learn from the pasuk of that says yakir, that the father has believability to identify the firstborn. Va'amar al aviv al achar b'charu. He says, no, Chaim is not the b'char. Dan is the b'char. Mao. Do we believe the father over the chazaka? So shalach lu, he sent to them, you know what? We view it as a suffix, and then they divide it. In other words, we view it and say that that Chaim and Dan should write a power of attorney one to the other, and they split it. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. There's two opinions. Manashach, Ikarabanan Svirale, if they hold, like the Rabbanan, that the father is not believed against the Chazaka, so then Lishal Galuk Rabbanan. It should say that the one that has the Chazaka should get the double portion. Ikar Rabbi Yehuda Svirle, and if we hold like Rabbi Yehuda that the father is believed against a Chazaka, then Lishal Galuk Rabbi Yehuda, that we should give it to Dan, who the father identified as a firstborn. Says the Gemara, Misafkale Ikar Rabbi Yehuda Ikar Rabbanan. The reason why Shmuel ruled it that they should split it is because Misafkale Ikar Rabbi Yehuda Ikar Rabbanan. It was Mesupik whether the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, okay, as I told you, this is a classic example of Talmudic way of doing things, where the Gemara first talks about a machloikis before introducing to us what the machloikis is. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
So says the Gemara, Mahi, what's this machloikis between Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda? The Tanya, it says by the firstborn, it says yakir, to make the person, he's recognized. And we darshan from the word yakir, yakirenu la'acherim. You could make him recognized to others. Mikan am Rabbi Yehuda. From here, Rabbi Yehuda says, Neman Adam Leimer Zeh B'ni B'char. He could say, this is my son, the firstborn. Ukeshen Shenema Neman Adam Leimer Zeh B'ni B'char. Just like he's believed to say, this is my son, the firstborn. He's also believed to say that the son is disqualified to kahuna. Kach Neman Adam Leimer Zeh Ben Gerusha V'Zeh Ben Chalutzi. Is the son of a marriage between a kohen and a divorcee, or a kohen and a chalutza, where the child is a chalal and is not allowed to eat truma and is not allowed to do the avodah. The chachamim aimrim einoi neman, and the chachamim say he's not believed. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Nachba Yitzchak l'Rava Bishloim l'Rabbi Yehuda, that the father is believed. Hainu d'chsev yakir. That's why the pasuk says that he can make him be recognized. El Rabbanon Yakir Lamali. That's different. There, it's talking about even the Rabbanon agree. It's talking about B'tzarech Hakera. It's talking about where there was no presumption, where there was no chazaka. So there's no chazaka. They just came from Russia. So then the father is believed to say which one is the firstborn. Says the Gemara, L'mai hilchasa, why do we need an identification of a firstborn? Says the Gemara, L'meis v'loi pishnayim, to give him a double portion. So the Gemara says, well, I don't understand, why do we have to make a song and dance? If the father wants to give him a double portion, let him make a bequest. He's giving him a double portion. Says the Gemara, Lo yehi ala achar, even if he wasn't the firstborn, ilu bo l'meis v'lei b'matana, if he wanted to grant him a double portion by bequest, milo yavle, wouldn't he be able to do it? And therefore he should have a migu. Why would he lie? Even if it's against the chazaka, he should have a migu. Why would he lie? If he was just making it up, instead of lying, just give him a bequest that he wants to give him a double portion. He doesn't have to lie and say he's a firstborn. Says the Gemara, Leitzricha, Reb Yehuda's chiddush is b'nechasim shenafloi loy la'achar mikan. It's talking about where property fell afterwards. Now, property fell afterwards. In that case, at the time he wouldn't have been able to make a bequest on that because it wasn't his yet. So therefore, he didn't have a migu on that property. Says Gemara, that he could make a bequest of something that didn't come yet in the world, so he would have a migu on something even that comes afterwards, yakir lamali. The chiddush is he's believed even on something that fell to him when he was a geisus. Something that falls to him when he's a geisus, when he's in the throes of death, when he's not capable of giving it over, he can't do ahead of time. And therefore we say, and we say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even so he's believed to say that the child is a firstborn, even though he doesn't have a migu, because of Yakir. Tan Rabbanan. If we assume that Chaim is a Bechar, V'omer Aviv al Achar Shehu Bechar, and the father says about someone else that he's a Bechar, done that he's a Bechar, Neman. So that would be like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that the father is believed even according to Chazak. If we assume that this man was not a Bechar, done was not a Bechar, V'amar Aviv Becharhu, and the father says he is a Bechar, Einoi Neman. That's like the Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, you're right. Reisha Rabbi Yehuda, the Reisha is going like Rabbi Yehuda, that we believe the father against the Chazak of a Sefer Rabbanan, and the Sefer is going according to Rabbanan. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Benihu. If the father says, this is my son, and then the Chazav Amar Avdihu, and then he says, he's my slave. Oh, that's a big difference. As an Eved Kanani, he can't marry a Beis Yaakov girl, right? It's all kinds of halachic ramifications. Einoi Neman, he can't switch his story. We have a rule in Eidos, you can't switch your testimony. Kevin Shehigid, Shuv Eina Chayzer Magid. Once you give one testimony, you can't change the story. But if he said Avdihu, he's my servant, the Chazer V'Amar Benihu, and then he said he's my son, Neman. Why? Because we could interpret that which he said initially was my servant, he was praising his son, that his son does such kibbut av'ein that he serves him like a servant. The Meshamish li ka'avda kamer. The chilufei abei samechas. And the opposite is if there was a tax collector. Because remember, a tax collector, you might dodge saying that your Eved is an Eved because you don't want to pay the high taxes on an Eved. So if he was by the tax collector, the Amar Benihu, and he says that he was my son. Now, if he's his son, he gets away from paying the taxes. The Chazav Amar Avdihu, and then he says he's my slave. So there, Naaman, there he could switch his story, because he could say, the only reason I said he was my son was to dodge the tax. But Amar Avdihu, if he said even in the tax collector that he's my slave, the Chazav Amar Benihu, and then he said he's my son, Eino Naaman. Meisvei. So now the Gemara asks, if, let's say, Chaim was serving him like a son, in other words, he was doing the things that are included in kibbut avayim. He was giving him food, giving him drink, helping him get dressed. Ubava Amar Benihu, and the father said he's my son. The Chazav Amar Avdihu, and then he says he's my slave. Ein an eman. He's not believed to switch his story. But he was doing even menial tasks for him. He was cleaning the toilet. Ubava Amar Avdihu. He said he's my slave. V'chazar v'amar benihu, and then he said he's my son. Einoi neman. And then he said he's my son. He's not believed. Now the question is, why not? Why don't you say that when he said initially he's my Eved, he meant that he's serving me like an Eved. He's doing even menial tasks, and he's giving him a compliment about the extent of his kibbut of aim. And we learned earlier that you could assume that when he said Eved initially, he just meant that he's serving me like an Eved. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains, Hasam dekari le avda meitzer meya. There, he called them an Eved with a boundary of 100. In other words, that's a very denigrating comment. Even though they saw him doing all that work, what does he mean that he's a slave with a limit of 100? It means that, don't get carried away. He's only worth 100 zuz. My Meitzer Meir, Meitzer Avda Kuv Zuze. The limits of this Eved is 100 zuz. Nobody would say that about a son, especially a son that was doing such amazing kibbut of aim. And therefore, when he said Avdi Meitzer Meya, it must be that he meant he was an Eved Kanani. And therefore, since he said that, he's not believed to switch his story, because Kevin Shehigid Shuv Einoi Chayzer Umagid. Okay, what a nice sweet daf. Tomorrow will also be a very nice sweet daf. I want to remind you that tomorrow night, please, Rabbi say, remember, tomorrow night shir is 8:30, because I have a doctor's appointment and I don't want to take a chance of getting back late. We did the Mishnah Yomis already, so now we're going to have the shir on Parshas Noach.